roll call votes, so we'll take voice votes on our agenda items tonight. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of our previous meeting from 11/16 of 2020, copies of which are in the meeting packets. Does anyone have any corrections or revisions to the minutes that they would like to see? If not, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Motion by Peckham, is there a second? Second by Herbst. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None are opposed, so the minutes are approved. Item number 2 is to consider approval or denial of various license applications. We have 2 recommended for denial this evening after the review of their records. Our ordinance allows for those individuals to address the committee. Do we have James Lake with us this evening to address the committee?
Yes.
Okay, come up, Mr. Lake. State your name and address.
James Lake, 325.5 North First Avenue, Wausau, Wisconsin.
Okay. And anything that is factually inaccurate in the record that was reviewed by the police department, if you want to talk with the committee about why they should not uphold the chief's recommendation?
The big thing is that you're denying me for a simple reason of read-ins that happened 27 years ago. Something that I wasn't really convicted of. They were just read-ins. Nothing like that on my record has ever appeared on my record after that, after 27 years. Second of all, 10 years ago, the city of Wausau have approved me for a cab license at one time. And also on the December 10th, I was also approved this year by the city Stevens Point for a cab license. And right now, I basically need this job to pay for my bills since I don't have a job. With the virus and everything going on, it's hard to find a job.
Sure. Each municipality has their own criteria for licensing cab drivers. Obviously, ours may be different than Stevens Point's or Weston's or anyone else's. We have set criteria that we go by following a police review of your record. And I see that you were previously denied in 2018 and 2019. And the record that we have in front of us indicates felony convictions, one of which is sexual assault.
Yes, but those are just read-ins. I was never convicted of those.
Okay, but
And all the other felony charges that I had were 27 years ago, which was all Class E felony charges.
the thing with cab driver licensing that we always consider is that we hold our public transport drivers to a elevated standard because often you are called upon to transport individuals who are impaired and whose judgment may be impaired. And so we need to be able to trust that individuals that hold that license are going to operate at a level above average. And so, I guess given the record and the 2 prior denials, I have difficulty granting that license. I guess, and often when the police department reviews the records, they often are able to review a more detailed version of the record even than what we get in our committee packets. And so if the police department's recommendation is to uphold that denial, barring anything that's inaccurate on your record, I have difficulty going against that recommendation and granting the license given what has taken place. So, committee members, any questions for Mr. Lake? Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, Mr. Lake, are you saying that you haven't had any arrests or problems in 27 years?
No, I had other misdemeanors in the last 27 years, but no felonies or anything, sir.
Okay.
All am I asking the committee is that they give me a license up until June to prove myself, and then if it doesn't work out then just don't renew my license in 2021.
Well, we would also like to hear from the police chief. If you'd like to step to the side so he can have the microphone so the 2 of you can be properly distanced. Welcome.
Thank you. So when this license was reviewed, I wasn't in the office, so a different person reviewed the criminal history and made the recommendation to the committee. Usually, if it's just a read-in, we don't recommend a denial based on a read-in charge. But based on the 2018 and 2019 denials, I think it's likely I would make the same recommendation. But I haven't reviewed that CIB file. So what I could say is if the committee wants to hold off on taking action, I can review that again just to make sure it's not just a read-in charge.
Sure.
And we could, if the recommendation would be changed, we can then issue the license,
Sure.
Tentatively.
Why don't we
and
hold
then-
action on it under those circumstances? Then this month, we certainly can review it at the January meeting. That'll give you some time
Right.
to take a look at the record and affirm or change that recommendation, so.
I would be interested in any offenses since then,
Subsequent.
what's he done in
since
the last
20 yeah.
10 years? Thank you.
Okay,
That gets one last thing.
step up to the microphone so you can be heard on the recording. Thank you.
The 2018 and 2019 was also denied for the same reason.
Okay,
So, because of the read-ins.
right.
So I
And
just
so,
wanted to bring that up, to let the committee know that right now.
right, well, and we would be the committee that issued the denial, so we'll see what the chief's review yields next month, and we'll hold action for right now. And so we won't deny tonight. We'll bring this back to the January meeting.
Okay, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you for coming in. Pat?
So if he had a recommendation from an employer or something like that that he could bring next week, that might help, next month, it might help his case?
Well, one thing we need to know is if there is something that has substantially changed either in the record or the behavior. And so, for a prospective employer to send a letter, of endorsement doesn't really show us that, we need to be able to,
I was thinking more a current employer or employer
Right.
in the interim or somebody that might be appropriate.
right,
What if I, I was on probation, I've been off probation now for a year now, but I was on probation for 2 years without any violations or anything. Is something like that recommended for an appeal or something would help, or?
that,
It would for me,
I
but
guess I would refer that question to the assistant city attorney as to what bearing those documents would have based on our consideration criteria. We've established set criteria for when we will and won't issue a license under these circumstances. And so my guess is that if those licenses were denied in the prior 2 years, both sessions, there's a reason for that beyond the read-in. So I guess I would like to, not advise you either way as someone who has to make the decision next month, but I'd like to hear what comes from the chief's review.
Okay,
So we'll take the information that he's got on those records, and we'll bring it back the third Monday of January, and we'll have this conversation again.
okay, thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thanks for coming in.
Okay, have a good Christmas.
Thank you, you too. The second denial recommendation is a new operator license for Jill Kreitzer. Is Jill Kreitzer in the audience this evening? Jill Kreitzer? We'll let the record show that Jill Kreitzer has not attended to address the committee. With that, I would accept a motion to either accept or deny licenses as recommended by staff, with the exception of Mr. Lake that we're going to carry over to next month. Motion by Wadinsky, is there a second? Second by McElhaney. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries. Item number 3 is discussion and possible action concerning suspension of Wausau Municipal Code, Section 5.64.036, drive-up sales relating to city liquor license holders. You'll recall that we've made a number of adjustments, or at least temporary adjustments, to try to assist businesses that have been affected by COVID-19 and people who are, consumers who've been affected by COVID-19. And so in this item, the pandemic-driven policymaking continues, Grocers have now requested that we consider giving them temporary provisions to deliver alcoholic beverage to consumers who have ordered those things online with their groceries. And that's, most recently, it came from groceries. Obviously, over the summer, we had some temporary provisions where we allowed restaurants to deliver sealed containers to vehicles. Same thing with bars. But we've got, this now is coming from grocery stores who people are ordering their groceries for the week, and they'd also like to be able to order alcoholic beverage. And so in your packets, you've got a draft of the proposed ordinance amendment. And we do need to make some suggestions, I guess, on the terms of it, if there's things that we want to change in the draft. And so you'll notice in the draft that's in the packets, let me just switch over to it. Here we go. We've got a write-up on there from Tara, who's done some research on this, and then also the proposed draft. Now, in her original draft, we had some criteria. We had requested, or at least the draft, if we pass it as written, would allow for this to happen between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. It would ask that orders placed after 2 p.m. be picked up the following day. It would ask that the sale be accompanied by at least a $15 food purchase so that the alcohol delivery to the vehicle is a secondary transaction. It's not the primary purpose. And that a licensed operator perform the sale. And we've also asked that if the purchaser is not the driver of the vehicle, that the driver of the vehicle picking up the order is at least age 21. I think there's some common sense provisions there. I think we obviously don't want, anybody to be able to order up alcohol online and then have their 16-year-old relative or friend drive up, pick that up, and drive off with it. So, I think that if there's any adjustments that you'd want to make to this as written, we certainly could make those now. Tara, do you have anything that you want to walk the committee through as a result of your research?
Well, some of these restrictions were things I saw in other communities that have allowed the click and collect sales. That's what they call them, click and collect sales. So some of those were things I had seen. I know Deputy Chief Matt Barnes didn't think maybe we needed to be as strict from the law enforcement perspective, but, he also, is aware that it's kind of the pleasure of the committee and the council how they want to see this go. And yet I'd also like some guidance as to how long you'd like to see this last as a sunset, so it automatically sunsets, because we haven't as a city allowed this before. This was not well recommended by the
AOD partnership.
AODA partnership, and
Right.
That was why, it looks like that was why it was voted that we would prohibit these kind of sales in the past, but.
Right, early on, there was a business model that was emerging in some other areas of the state where Applebee's was looking to deliver it with Carside To Go. They were obviously into Carside To Go before it was everyone's thing now. But, we had decided that the optics of delivering intoxicants through the window of a car and having people drive off with it was just not something that we wanted to permit. Along came the pandemic at that point, though, and with everyone trying to make as many purchases curbside or, outside a crowd-based environment, inside of an enclosed building, we had loosened a little of that over the summer. But, and this is another request for that. There's a number of grocery stores in the area that allow people to click and collect their groceries. And I've heard from one store owner who's been asked by a number of customers who would like to purchase things like beer and wine and have that added to their grocery order and brought out to the car, rather than have to go in. Currently, they have to go in to make the alcohol purchase face-to-face, but they can still click and collect those groceries. And so it really kind of defeats the purpose of curbside pickup if they're still having to go in and do that under the circumstances with the expansion of the virus in the area. Go ahead, Tara.
As this is written, it only applies to grocery stores and restaurants to allow people to get, takeout sort of curbside delivered alcohol and food. What we had before, when the pandemic first started, was the Department of Revenue had decided that and Governor Evers, that they would allow, because they had shut bars and taverns down, they were going to allow bars and taverns to sell carry-out alcohol only, since people couldn't go in. That was during the complete shutdown. That suspension of our ordinance is no longer in effect. So we had it for a little bit, but it only applied to bars and taverns, and now everything kind of was back to prohibiting this kind of thing.
Right, and that leeway that was granted during that safer at home order and during the tavern closures was really for them to deliver sealed, closed containers, not open carryout, but they could sell packaged things.
And this
for-
is the same thing, that's a good point. This is only, I think I made it so that it's only original, in the original container. You know, you can't give a cup of something to go at a restaurant. It'd have to be beer or wine or something in a container.
Sure, and then they would take it home and mix it like they do. A lot of our restaurants do that even now. Well, when we're able to have concerts on the square, some of the downtown businesses would offer the container, you know, with the ice and whatever, and then they would give them a small container of the alcohol, and they'd have to take it over to the park and mix it themselves. They couldn't mix it and take it out the doors, so.
And the other important thing is, in order for people to do this, if the committee votes to move it forward to council and council approves it, these grocery stores and restaurants are going to have to do a temporary amendment of their premises. And when we did this before, bars and taverns didn't want to have to wait to go to the next public health and safety meeting to get their premises amended. So if you do want to do this, let me know whether you want Mary Gady or Leslie to hand out the temporary amendment of premises or in conjunction with the police department.
Right.
That's very
That's one thing also, is if we want to delegate that, those amendments to staff like we did in the spring. We let them go through the application process, and after the department and the police department had reviewed it, then they would grant those temporary amendments so that businesses could get going and not wait, 3-4 extra weeks for us to make basically that same decision when we would rely on their recommendations anyhow. What are your thoughts, committee? Are you satisfied with the wording of the ordinance, and are you good with delegating the approval to the staff? Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you. I think delegating the approval of the staff is a good idea to kind of streamline this. On page 10 of our packet, the standards and requirements that you just reviewed several of, I'm not saying we should go back to the Wild West, but some of this stuff seems like it is cumbersome and would hinder the process of that business transaction taking place, with orders being placed after 2 p.m. may not be picked at them. So I would almost just remove that
Repeal that?
entirely. And
Okay.
let the business decide how much time they want to require a customer to give them to place an order. And I'm not sure about the 4-hour waiting period between the time of order and pickup time. I'm not sure what function that serves. And I've kind of split on the $15, you got to order $15 worth of food. I don't know, if somebody's having company over and they want to drive by and get a bottle of something or other and they don't need any food, I don't know. It just seems like it's
Okay.
a little
One
over
of
the
the
top.
feedback items that we had gotten from Deputy Chief Barnes was that he also questioned the 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and the after 2 p.m. provision, partly because their retail license sets specific hours already. So they can't sell liquor after 9 p.m. and they can't sell beer after midnight. And so his plan was that, or his proposal was that we would enable this provision to run with the same hours as the retail license. That way if they're open for business and they're able to legally sell the item, they would legally be able to deliver it curbside. I mean, obviously, it's up to the retailer as to whether or not they're going to staff people to serve that curbside pickup at those odd hours. Some stores may only allow it up to a certain period of time, but as far as the license, if the license allows them to legally make the sale, do we want to dovetail those hours and allow them to pick it up curbside? I mean, for some people that work shifts, they may grocery shop at odd hours. So do we want to get rid of the 8 a.m. to 8 p. and go ahead, Becky.
I agree.
I agree with Pat. I think that, we want to make this safe, but we also don't want to make it cumbersome. Well, was it after 8, or when did you place your order?
Right.
I don't understand that. And the 4-hour minimum waiting period seems goofy to me. I mean, Pat's, example is for a restaurant. It's like, I hear from these grocery stores, a lot of them have to wait a day anyway. So again, if they could get a slot in, I don't want to say, well, you can't,
Right.
you have to come back again or whatever. I guess, again, it's going to be cumbersome, and it's cumbersome on our establishments as well to continue with those. And then the third thing is at least $15. I see the reasoning. You don't want this as primary alcohol sales. But again, I think it's going to be cumbersome on our establishments, is that if you have a single person that wants a dinner with a margarita at El Taqueria, and say, well, I'm sorry, you have to keep adding your money to your, to your order. I don't know, I think it's defeating kind of our purpose, and it's causing, I don't know if it's going to be truly
Right.
watched anyway. I don't think anybody's going to be in the store is going to say, well, you didn't hit your
And
$15.
you could eliminate the dollar total. I mean, eliminate the $15 and just say that the curbside alcohol sale shall be accompanied by a food purchase, period. And so you don't have to put a dollar total necessarily. That really keeps you from becoming a drive-up liquor store type, permitter. And you wouldn't have to set a dollar total. You would just ask that food and beverage both be sold together. Jim?
I agree that there has to be something in there other than just the alcohol sale. They should be buying something else with it, so that would be probably a minimum. There should be a food order with it. And the 4-hour waiting period, I don't think we need that. And the pickup hours, it already says pick-up hours, not sale hours. And they probably should be with their license according to those times.
Okay. I agree. So far, if I'm hearing you guys right, we want to get rid of the pickup hours limiting to 8 a.m., 8 p.m., and get rid of the 2 p.m. picked up the following day. That's sub-requirement number 1. We want to get rid of number 2, which is the 4-hour wait period, and we want to remove the $15 threshold from item 3. Item 4, we still want a licensed operator to make the sale. We want that person to verify the ID and be able to assess the nature of the person that's picking up to make sure that they're not already overserved or underage. Item 5, I think it makes sense that we would request that the pickup person be at least of legal age. Number 5, we would leave. Payment for the order cannot be consummated until the purchaser has identified the buyer and verified their age. I think if you allow them to pay for it online, that then enables underage purchase. So that number 6 did make sense, where they would physically make that sale once they've seen the person. Go ahead.
Quick question. I mean, I haven't done curbside. Has anybody, do they allow you to buy or purchase things once you get there? Or does it have to be paid for online, for like a grocery store is what I'm asking. I don't know.
Pick and save, you pay in advance. When you come and get your stuff, it's paid for. And you
Right.
just throw it in
And
the
so I
car
wonder
and
if we should maybe not change that to the payment cannot be consummated, but the delivery of the product to the car. I think that's what we need to clarify. So maybe we need to amend that, remove the provision about payment for the order cannot be completed. It will say that the alcohol sale shall not be completed and product delivered until the seller has been able to verify the ID of the pickup person. So, and we'll get, Dawn, go ahead.
I have a concern with number 4 and 5, really. Who is going to perform this identity, this proof that they are of age? I mean,
Well, that happens on the retail license already. It's just like when
Okay.
you go to the checkout at, if you go to the checkout at the grocery store, and so they are supposed to be verifying age, and someone that's of age is supposed to be selling it. So a lot of times when you go through the checkout person can't ring it in for you. They have to wait for the manager to come. It's because the manager has the license.
Okay.
And we're still asking for that same thing, that the person who holds the bartender license, there's some in every store, that the person who holds that license, who's had some training as far as how to recognize when people are, recognize
fake identification, when people have been already overserved and when they're visibly underage. And they learn when they get the license how to verify that. That's what we're still asking, that the person who's done that is the seller. And not, just, send some cashier out that has no training and probably may not be of age themselves. We want a licensed person to.
Yeah, that's a big concern of mine.
Okay. Let me just see here.
I could, but.
Go ahead, Pat.
I would just say that we don't want to throw the doors wide open on, willy-nilly alcohol sales, but we also want to make this workable, and we want to keep in mind that this is temporary, and hopefully it's not going to be in place too long.
Correct. And that's, I think, one thing we need to be clear with the retailers on is that it is our intent that it be temporary and that we are certainly not looking to enable this type of sale permanently in the absence of a pandemic. I mean, this is obviously kind of extraordinary policy for extraordinary times. That said, all the other provisions that we had here, the 6, 7, and 8, you're verifying the ID of the purchaser or the pickup person. The pickup area is clearly marked. I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. And that in the pickup area, they're not going to allow tasting events because they can allow them in beverage centers and things. So we need to set a sunset date, though? We know, or we believe at least, before they get to widespread vaccines, that we'll be into the summer. Do you guys want to hold this open until like June 30th, which is when all of the licenses renew? And, if we're still in a situation, that everyone's license renews. If you're doing a temporary amendment, the temporary amendment would go to the end of this license. And then, assuming on July 1st when they all renew, they'd all renew without it, is our hope. Would that work for?
That's a good idea, and we could revisit if we have to then.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, are we all kind of in agreement on that then?
Will Tara review the changes for us before we vote?
Will I?
Did you get them down?
Let me see if we can recap and,
Do is go and, I have everything except the wording Lisa actually did about the one number, but it can.
Can't hear her.
Substance, no.
The AV guy back there,
Lisa said about-
Tara?
come up to the mic, Tara,
I'd
because
like you
the
at the microphone.
recording can't get you.
So I always go and I listen to the tape. I have everything down. I have the June 30th. I have the other things. The only thing I was scribbling was what Lisa had said verbatim on number 6, but I'll go and listen to the recording on that. And then
Okay,
you guys will,
Right.
peek at it before. And then who's going to issue these? The clerk's office? The temporary amendments?
Yes, because they
Okay.
issued the ones in the spring and that worked out really well. People didn't need to wait. Once they've met the criteria, they were able to get their amendment.
And who can then, because you will not be amending the premises, I'm going to recommend that public health and safety be the body that hears any appeal were the clerk's office to deny
Correct.
an amendment, so.
For sure. What I wrote down for the changes, and we would then accept a motion to approve this based with the following changes, is that we would delegate the approval of the amendment to staff once the criteria has been met, that we will remove the provision that limits the sale hours to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and includes next day pickup after 2 p.m. That would be out completely. We would then delete also the 4-hour waiting period, which was item number 2. That would be out completely. We'd remove the $15 threshold for the food purchase. We would just require that a food purchase accompany the alcohol sale, but not a set dollar amount. We would leave in that the licensed bartender must perform the sale. We would leave in that the driver has to be at least of legal age that's picking the stuff up. And then number 6, we would remove the reference to payment for the order not occurring until the ID has been verified. And we would change that to remove the reference to payment, but include reference to delivery of the product to the vehicle. That way, even if someone has bought it, that the verification would happen before they actually get the item. And then the other items we did not amend. Did I cover everything that we've
Everything
come up
I
with,
have.
committee? Okay, so then I would accept a motion then to approve this with those provisions. Motion by Herbst, is there a second? Second by McElhaney. Further discussion or questions? Hearing and seeing none. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries. Okay, let's see here. And then, item number 4 is an update from a discussion that we had at a previous meeting. Discussion and possible action regarding public education efforts surrounding use of facial coverings to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and discussion of alternatives for mask access by citizens in need. Do we have an update on that process? Mayor?
We do.
Welcome.
So I have been working with G. Morty and the Makers on a video campaign and also social media newsletter. It'll go everywhere.
Okay.
We have a couple of concepts. Thankfully, Captain Todd Baton has been my partner in crime here. And so we're kind of refining those. Some of them are pretty sassy. Others are. So we're trying to decide what direction we should go. We should have that coming out January, mid-January maybe. So we're moving pretty quickly as far as these things go. But we are ready. So.
Excellent. Well, they tell us we may need masks through the summer, so depending on where we're at with the vaccine schedule, so.
I'm sure everyone's
good that
excited
we're-
about that.
Everyone is beyond excitement about that, so, good deal. Anyone have questions for the mayor on those efforts? Because that really is all we had asked her to do prior.
And this is under the purview of the mayor's office, and the mayor's office is going to do this. We don't need to approve it, review
No.
it, nothing.
We don't.
Very
Nope.
good.
She's off and running.
Cool.
Good deal. Thank
Thanks.
you for that. Item number 5 is the operations report from the fire department for October and November of 2020. We have Deputy Chief Bartek with us. If you have questions for him about items that appear on the report, are there any questions about the fire department report? If not, we'll place their report on file. Anything notable on the report that you wanted to talk about, Chief?
You'll notice that you got October and November, and that was due to a software issue that we were having, if you recall it that. Fairly quiet as far as large notable events over the last couple of months. Of course, very busy with COVID and other things like that, but we're doing well.
Excellent. All right, so with that, we'll place that report on file if no one has questions. All right, and the next item on our agenda is tavern activities, compliance checks, and law enforcement activities. You have this month's report in the packets, and any notable events appearing on the report that you wanted to talk about, Chief? I see it's been an active month over at Rocks.
I don't have anything other than what's in the report. I would like to just update the committee that we did, Todd Baton and I had discussions with Sharon Kingston, the owner of Aftershock, and talked about some of the issues that they were experiencing there. It definitely seems to me to be an issue less of, the layout of the property and the lighting and that kind of thing, as much as it is a disagreement between neighbors. We've sent over one of our officers who has training in environmental design, and I just got that report this morning, so I reviewed it just briefly, but he's making recommendations to put up a barrier, kind of on the southeast part of the property between the neighbors and the where the bar door is, to add a camera, to add lighting, and those kinds of things. But the officer also makes the astute observation that really it's up to the ownership of that establishment to make sure that they're monitoring what's going on out in the parking lot, and how the customers are behaving, and it's really their responsibility to do that. I made the same point to Sharon when she came down to the police department and we had our meeting. But there's definitely a concern, I think, between the owner and the neighbor. They don't seem to get along very well, which is definitely part of the issue, I think.
The issue that we have in the neighborhood, and I guess I will say I've lived in that neighborhood with the exception of 3 years my entire life. That property has been a bar forever. It's had a number of different owners. The neighbors that are down there have been the same neighbors forever, 30 years. And so we have never had a neighborhood issue with a tavern on that site until Aftershock moved in there after they moved off Thomas Street. And you'll recall when they moved over there, they already had a license for the Thomas Street location, and we were clear that when they moved into a residential neighborhood with a totally different traffic flow and residential vibe, that there was no way that that neighborhood was going to support some of the activity that was taking place when they were on Thomas Street. And they, at the time, had committed to want to be, better managers and better owners, and we've heard that before from other owners. That was very short-lived. And so after the meeting between your department and the tavern owner, her response, instead of committing to, manage things better, her response was to march outside and confront the neighbor and spray paint a line down the driveway and inform that neighbor that she's now going to get what she deserves. And so now it's gone from, neighbors maybe not seeing eye to eye, and really all the neighbors had been asking for was that the behaviors that are taking place outside be routed to the back of the building. The back of the building isn't necessarily visible from the neighbor's home, so they don't have to see it and hear it. So when we have issues with, loud behaviors and public urination and littering, and, there's open drinks going outside because people go out to smoke, they take their drink with them, and by the time, the neighbor calls in and the officer goes by, they're back inside. So the likelihood that they're going to get caught in the act, it could happen, but, it's not just a neighborhood dispute, because that building has been a bar forever, and we've never had troubles between neighbors and tavern before, because the prior owner of the tavern adopted a zero tolerance policy for the exact things that are happening now. So, I've been following this whole thing, at least for the last 12 years that I've been representing the neighborhood, and this whole thing has blown up since that opened. And so my hope was that, in asking that you network with the owner, that they would commit to being a better neighbor, and instead, all it did was inflame the confrontation with, not only the immediate confrontation as with the next door neighbor, but the neighbors across the street and down the block have the same exact problems. And so I'm getting the same reports from 3 or 4 homes, not just the one, but the tavern owner's mad at the one. So we need solutions there. If they're going to erect fencing, there's some shared lot lines there that they're going to have to get not only the proper permits, but observe some, lot line clearances as well. They can't just run it right down the middle.
Yeah, she did talk about the lot lines and how she would have to make sure she knew exactly where they were prior to erecting a fence and to make sure it was within code.
Yep.
I did talk to her about that. It's not just one neighbor that's making complaints. There's numerous neighbors that are making complaints. The other thing that we will start doing is regular compliance checks and tavern checks at that establishment, just to monitor what's going on and transpiring, to have a law enforcement presence there. Hopefully that will curb some of the behavior. And then lastly, I did talk to her about the demerit point system, what the consequences for failing to remediate the behaviors could be for her license. So she's well aware of what those consequences could be.
I hope so, and I think part of the problem also is not so much when the owner isn't present, it's the folks that are left in charge as management when the owner isn't there. A lot of this stuff seems to happen now, though, at least from what I've heard, the time between 9 p.m. and midnight is actually worse than bar time. They're not as busy at bar time most days, and this really has been a problem between Wednesday and Saturday night. So, it's easy for the neighbors to tell us exactly when to watch, because they've been living this. And all summer, there's a couple that can't even have their windows open in the summer because of what's taken place outside. So, after all of the tavern issues that we've experienced in the committee, both with, noise and drugs and outside alcohol and all these things that have happened, I think it's easy for us as a committee to sympathize with neighbors who've lived there all along and who are now in a situation where they feel like they're ready to sell their house because things are awful. And, I think that it's good that you reminded the owner that the license is a privilege, not a right, because as a committee, I think we want to see the owner commit to be a better neighbor. We have taverns all over town that exist in residential areas, and we don't have those owners in here every month. So there are some that are doing it right, but this one is not. And so I'm glad that you started that conversation.
You bet.
Okay, anything from the committee? Pat, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if the chief could talk about the part of the M&R station portion of the compilation where the owner allowed video footage to be overridden when the owner knew that your department wanted to view that. It seems pretty brassy.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking about that. There's another council member that had a question about that. And I don't know for sure that, without doing the follow-up and talking to the officer involved, that was intentionally overridden. So an officer stopped back 3 days after the incident to talk to the owner, but the establishment was closed, so the officer didn't have an opportunity to talk to the owner at that time, and then stopped back 7 days later after returning from some off time. And at that point, I think, if I remember correctly from my conversations with Rick Gordon, is that the video is stored on their system for 7 days. So if we don't get it within that 7-day time period, it's automatically
The
overwritten.
loop just rewrites on
Right,
its own?
and
Okay.
so that may have been our fault by not having another officer from another shift go and get that video. So I don't know the
I think
answer.
you're being generous, because the report here says, the officer told the owner he would have to review the video, and the owner agreed, and then the owner let the video get overwritten, so.
Yeah, I'm definitely assuming positive intent with what I said, but,
Very good.
if we weren't very clear with the owner that we need and want that video retained, I don't know how clear we were, and I guess that's my point, so, I don't want to, and I know there's been issues there with video specifically, but I don't want to stand here and tell you that there was another issue without knowing that for fact.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like it's been an active month at a number of establishments. I'm glad to see that in some of those that the bartenders are initiating the calls. I just had a conversation with somebody today that lives near Aftershock, and, that person said, well, they're never going to report their own patrons. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of taverns will.
Absolutely.
If they're doing it right and they're running it properly and things are, they're asking for behaviors to be modified and the patron either refuses to modify or refuses to leave, they are calling on their patrons if they have to. And I think that's the difference that we need to see happening over on Leonard Street is, we need to encourage them to call also. And it's not so much that, and I think one thing they need to understand is, it's not necessarily just the volume of calls. If they're initiating calls for help to create a better establishment, no one's going to hold that against them. But I think when they, fail to call and then fight with people who do call, that's why we have trouble. Jim?
I am really impressed when I read that a bartender at an establishment called the police for assistance, because that's what they're supposed to do, and that is really good. I would hope we would take that in consideration if there's ever a problem and say, hey, you've had all these goods, now you had one bad, we'll work with you.
Well, and I think we've seen that with a lot of other ones too, where sometimes the call volume is real high, but if you split that up and see how much worse is it when the owner and the bartenders call and they're asking for help to get the place under control? That's a totally different conversation than letting stuff spill into the parking lot and then it's becomes something else, a fight or a medical emergency or whatever, because, we had one at one point that would just bounce it out the door into the parking lot, and whatever happened in the parking lot just happened, and that one's closed now, partially for that reason, because their place wasn't safe. And so we definitely want them to call and develop a positive relationship with the police department, and I think we recognize that sometimes to get things under control, they have to start calling and keep calling until the patrons sometimes figure out that they're not going to tolerate the behavior, because I think once things get out of hand and the certain patrons know that they won't be called on, they can take the place right over. And we saw that with Clubhouse. So, I definitely agree with your sentiment there.
And I think, this committee has been very frank whenever they've talked with a bar owner that, it is their responsibility and your expectation to call police when there's issues, to head off significant events at any of these establishments. And just so I can say for the record, that is a conversation I had with Sharon Kingston from Aftershock as well, that our expectation is not that that they will ignore things or try to handle things themselves, but they'll call us to help remedy some of these issues as they're going on.
Well, that, and, we know that it's a guarantee that when an establishment gets to 100 demerit points, they're going to be in here for a talk with us about how they're going to be better. But, there's nothing that says that we have to wait to have a talk with an owner for them to accumulate 100 points. Now, Aftershock right now, because they've not necessarily been caught in the act enough, they have not got 100 points. They don't have points today. And, that said, if things don't improve and it continues to get worse, there's nothing to say that, the committee cannot bring the owner in here and have a frank conversation with her before they get to that point. But I think right now, at least the fact that you've started it and you've, tried to make them aware that, this situation is, A, not going away and is certainly not improving. That's, I think, where we need to begin with them.
Well, based on your feedback too, I don't think we're gonna give a lot of grace when we're there in terms of when there's citable offenses either. If, you know, if they're continuing to stir the pot right after having a conversation about the issues that are occurring there, that's concerning.
Right, you know, and hopefully they recognize that when they do that, you know, and I think one of the last confrontations that happened between the neighbor and the owner may have happened while the officer was still on site, and if that's the case, that could be on body cam. You know, and I actually hope it is, because, you know, I think that sometimes, you know, when we bring the owners in to have a conversation with them, sometimes the people that appear before the committee behave completely differently than they appear in the moment at their establishment. You know, we've seen that before. When we bring the owner in, the dialogue between the committee and the owner is a lot different than what happens with either the police in the moment or with neighbors. So
Very true.
I'm glad. Anything else with regard to the tavern report? If not, we'll place the tavern report on file as well, and we'll just keep monitoring that report and, you know, see if we see some improvements at Aftershock as well. Item number 7 on the agenda is communications. Does anyone have any? I have none. Okay, and with that, that concludes our agenda, so I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Wadinski, is there a second? Second by Herbst. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. No one's ever opposed. We'll stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Have a good holiday, and we will see you in 2021.